Good that you could be with me. There, occasionally there's a story that kind of piques my interest because um, I know the people involved, actually, which is unusual because there are lots of people I don't know, and therefore there are lots of people's stories which I don't know either. So, what I want to do is talk about this one, and this is actually an interesting case because it's about the abduction of children. And the backstory is basically these people that I'm about to talk about are concerned about the family court the family court um, issuing orders that a child be returned to a parent, usually the father, whom they believe has been abusing the kids, or in their view is a pedophile, because for some of these dudes, everybody is apparently. So, and I do tend to um, empathise, I guess, because I actually met some of the women I think that were involved in this case, not a few years ago, where their children, these are grandparents, so the children were taken were passed over to uh, the the father of the children, and they had worked in order to have the children returned back to the mother or returned back into the grandparents' care. Now, at the time, I had met some of these people, which was at a conference a few years ago. They had the magic bracelet on because the police had caught up to them and were charging them with kidnapping. Now, the problem that we have is that there are certain laws, regardless of whether we agree with them or not, or think that that they're fair. There are laws which basically tell us that there are certain things that we can't do. And one of them is that when there's a court order issued and a child is placed with somebody whom another party may think may be harming them, then there is often nothing we can do in order to prevent that from happening. I'm hoping that if that ever does happen and a child is placed with, regretfully, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but unfortunately I know that it does, then that child should have the opportunity later on in life to take some sort of action against the authorities that suggested that the child be placed with someone who abused them, who's a pedophile or whatever. But I think it's very sad because I know that there are those cases where I know of a couple of cases I've been working on recently whereby the children have been returned to a man that the children don't want to be with, and that the children believe is abusing them emotionally and physically, psychologically. So I understand all of that. I get it. But when there's a law in place that says that you can't do that, and you try to find a way around that law which is not legal, that is, you abduct the children away from whomever they were assigned to be with, then you are kind of in trouble. So there's an article came out the other day on news.com.au, and it just reminded me of all of these events because I had been kind of, well, I haven't been involved with them, but I knew about them, and I've spoken to some of the people, and even Dr. Pigeon, who comes up in this article, I do know, and Pastor Paul, I know, and he's also features in this as well. Even though I don't think he was one of those abductors, but he was one that offered some advice. Now, I need to say that my understanding of these people is that they're all decent people. They're not nasty, they're not vindictive, they are passionate people who want to protect children from further harm. And I think there's any one of us out there that are faced with an issue whereby you have a child and that child is placed with somebody whom you know is harming them, you will move heaven and earth in order to have them returned back to you. But often the cost in doing that is extreme. And there are certainly occasions where one could argue that there's a lack of, I was going to say corruption, but that's probably a bit stronger word, even though I know other people use that word. There's a lack of understanding as to what the child wants and what actually is in the best interest of the child. Now, this becomes more complicated because on many occasions there are spurious complaints made against from one party to another, which are often unfounded. And so how one works out what is truth, what is not, what is distortion, what is parental alienation, and what even is suppressed memories for that matter, as to how someone works out all of that stuff and walks their way through that minefield, I do not know, because it's complicated, even though I hate that word, but it is involved. Now, the article in question is this one here, and so we did not abduct anyone, says Dr. Pigeon. That's his defiant claim as alleged child stealing network case proceeds. Now, there was a group of them who decided to do all of this, and even though I understand their motivation and their passion, I get all of that, but if it's like saying if the law says that we should not kill people, for example, and we have someone before us who we think is the most violent person on this planet, who is going to harm a whole host of other people, it doesn't mean we don't necessarily go out and create a vigilante group that goes out and gets rid of this person through whatever means. We should never do that. We should always abide by the law, even though the law on occasions may just seem to be an ass. I accept all of that. So in this case, court has laid out the next move for a doctor and several co-accused alleged to have been involved in a child abduction ring. And I think there were about 7 of them that were involved in this. New South Wales doctor accused of being part of a child stealing network has defiantly claimed in court he and his co-accused did not abduct anyone. Now, that might be a reasonable argument too. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but they could argue that these people came willingly. They didn't tie them up. They didn't do whatever they would do if you normally do in a abduction. These people came willingly with them to wherever they were taking them, presumably to see their family, and that they weren't abducting them. However, according to the law, they probably were. Dr. William Russell Pigeon and Patrick Finbay McCurry O'Day are 2 of 7 people accused of being part of the syndicate which police alleged helped mothers abduct their children they claimed were being sexually abused by their fathers. During a chaotic hearing on Monday, several supporters in the public gallery talked through proceedings, one holding up a sign that read corrupt, I guess referring to the police and the magistrate as being corrupt, I would imagine. Dr. Pigeon took issue with the wording of abduction in a copy of the prosecution's statement of fact he had seen. I have the most profound objection to that. It implies a crime, infers a crime and wrongdoing, he told the Brisbane District Court. We did not abduct anyone. Dr. Pigeon said he was also seeking police records related to the alleged abuse of children connected with the case. And now the judge ruled here on that, and I think that ruling is probably fair, that it was not relevant. What Dr. Pigeon was seeking was not relevant to this particular case. It may be relevant to another case where perhaps the police prosecutions have taken an issue against the fathers, but anyway, he said, as he said here anyway, the fathers are not on trial, you are on trial. What matters is what you knew, what you believed, and why. Judge Clare reiterated Dr. Pigeon and what did he do? Reiterated Dr. Pigeon and the other defendants had their chance to raise their issues with the case of a further hearing listed next month. Now, a guy that features in this is this guy that you see in picture now, who is Pastor Paul, still working out what is a pastor to, but he's a pastor, so he says, nevertheless. and he's been supporting them on this matter. Mr. O'Day also complained he was unable to get legal representation because his income had been decimated and could not obtain court documents contained on a USB, and that the further trial is being set for 12th of May. Now, the issue for me is not that he or they did anything morally wrong, because they felt they were morally obligated to ensure that these children were safe and not referred or placed in the care of people that were going to harm them. Now, I really understand that. And this is whereby we become a wee bit confused, because we might want to take a moral stance around something, and rightfully so. 10 out of 10 to them for that. But if the actions that you take around your moral stance means that you are going to wind up transgressing the law, then clearly that is not a place that you want to be, because eventually you're not doing yourself any favours. You're not winning, because in this case, my guess is these kids were returned to the alleged offending parents. And then another order would have been slapped in your face saying that, you can't get within 200 metres, 100 kilometres, who knows. You could not go anywhere near these children. And if the parents were involved, grandparents and others, then they also then the court would make sure that their relationship will be severed until these children reach adulthood. So, sometimes it's better to accept the status quo for whatever it might be, even though you might disagree with the outcome, and work within that system in order to get the best outcome that you can. Sometimes we simply do not win. Sometimes we simply have to give in to whatever it is that confronts us. And we have to learn to find a way to live with that, as terrible as it is. And to be there, my experience is that kids wind up when they're about 13 or 14, they tend to vote with their feet. If they're really unhappy where they are, and if there are issues that need to be disclosed, that's the kind of age at which they will do it. Now, I don't know how old these kids were necessarily, and I think it's horrifying to think that they might be in horrible, abusive type situations. But the best we can do as a community is to support them when they come out of that, to care for them, provide them with counselling and services, and for families in particular, to be there for them, not locked up, not with a criminal history, but to be there for them, to support them as best as they can, so they can talk about their experiences when they were with these alleged horrible people. So I'd be interested to know what you think, and I'll also be interested in you finding some space and time to subscribe to my channel, so that you can be notified when there are other further interesting and exciting articles to talk about, such as this one. So thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, everybody, be safe.